Hello there, beautiful humans. Melinda Joy, Crossroads Storyteller here with a deeper look at the Biblical Tarot. I am a professional tarot reader, and before I was a tarot reader, I was a biblical studies scholar and a pastor. This is going to be a multi-part series, so be sure to check the description box below to find the playlist. And in this series, we're going to be comparing the Nicholas Conver Tarot de Marseille and the Pamela Coleman Smith Smith-Waite Tarot Deck Centennial Edition to the Biblical Tarot. Note that all of the opinions and perspectives on these cards will be from my unique perspective. I have not yet read the guidebook that comes with this deck, and I am super stoked to explore this Biblical Tarot deeper with you. 8 of Chalices, the Ascension of Jesus. After he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. Acts 1:9. So we have a very clear connection between these two cards. In both cases, there is someone leaving the scene. But let's talk about this card for a moment also. We do have some kind of partnership. These two cups resemble the Two of Cups card. And we also have those two surrounded by larger community. So we have a deep connection and we have active interaction. And when we look at this card, especially these cups here, I like to imagine that this individual was beginning to build a pyramid of cups. And instead of continuing the process and adding a 9th cup here, instead of continuing to build through the numbers up till 10, this individual takes the 9th cup with him and leaves. Perhaps if we add these two together, we come up with this card and this meaning. We have an active community. This community happens to have just been disturbed by the death of their leader. However, they're still a community, and after the resurrection, continued intimacy between Jesus and his followers. However, that intimate relationship needs to turn into the acts agenda of a larger collaborative, collective community. And that only happens when Jesus leaves. So we do have this leaving component and we do have this active community component. I think what makes this card unique is that the leaving might be sad like it is in this card, but the leaving has a promise. Perhaps the promise is hinted at in this card. Promise of continuing the project that in this card is very clearly unfinished. And maybe Jesus is leaving before the project is finished, but the project in this card is continuing to be invested in just by different people. 9 of Chalices, the Feast of Purim. As the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. Esther 9:22. So here we have a feast day that is still celebrated today by many Jewish humans, and it is a celebration of surviving what was going to be a mass execution. And Esther has a meeting with her husband. Her actions have some risk involved, and she does it anyways and mediates on behalf of her people. And the person who originally was running the execution program gets executed instead, Haman. So we have this celebration very clearly presented here. Here we have a full house, a full family gathering. All of these cups are covering up as much space as the card allows for, and it is potentially a very vibrant celebration here. And then in this card, we have an accomplishment. So perhaps this is Esther's accomplishment, and she has performed her works herself, even though they were on behalf of her connections and her relationships. 10 of Chalices, Elizabeth and Zechariah's joy. He will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. Luke 1:14. This is John the Baptist's birth, which is a exciting story because John the Baptist is the character who paves the way for Jesus. And John the Baptist does that in a myriad of ways. He leads Jesus into the initiatory baptism that results in Jesus's more intentional ministry. But John the Baptist also prepares the way for Jesus by preaching a similar gospel about forgiveness and social equality and caring for your neighbor, etc. And John the Baptist's birth is really exciting because it doesn't show so much in this card, but if we look at the second edition card, we see that the parents are on the older side. So part of Elizabeth and Zechariah's joy is that they were old enough that they were no longer expecting to be able to conceive. And Zechariah actually loses his voice and his ability to speak until John the Baptist is born because of his disbelief. His voice is taken from him. Here we also have a very happy family, as is represented in biblical tarot. And over here we have the 9 cups that made up the last card, except in addition to that we have this 10th cup that's on its side. And oftentimes 10 is the climax of the number cycle. It's the final finale before the conclusion. And so some people see this cup on its side as pouring out liquid and that being a sign of the conclusion. And I think maybe it's sort of interesting because at the end of John the Baptist's life, his blood is shed for political reasons. And that's a pretty clear conclusion to his ministry. Page of Chalices, Samuel, the boy prophet. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. 1 Samuel 3:10. This is the first time Samuel experiences hearing God's voice, and he's actually surprised to discover that it's God's voice because he's pretty sure it is the high priest Eli's voice that he's hearing. However, Eli catches on that Samuel is hearing God's voice and tells Samuel, the next time you hear God speak to you, say, Speak, for your servant is listening. And so we have this page of Chalices representing this very first call from God. I appreciate this. This is hearkening back to when I was talking about the cup suit as an intuitive knowing and a non-mental way of knowing. And I appreciate the spiritual connotation of that sentiment in this card. In all of the cases, we have a newbie, someone who is beginning their cup journey. It might be a new relationship, it might be a new way of relating, it might just be learning how to witness and identify their feelings. Whatever the process and adventure is, they are at the very beginning of the process, the very beginning of the journey. And what's so cool about putting Samuel here is that we know from the context of the rest of the Hebrew Bible that Samuel is one of the most significant prophets, at least of his time, if not in the entire Old Testament. Depends on your perspective of what makes a prophet great. Either way, he's very influential and very significant to some very key stories, especially those around David and Saul. So what's cool about this card is that we know that this beginner goes on to do really great things. And I think that's a really fun tint to this card. Knight of Chalices, young David. David took up a harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. 1 Samuel 16:23. I am enjoying the consistency of the narrative with these courts so far. We have Samuel, and now we have David, both characters that interacted with each other in the text. So we have someone going on a quest in these cards. I like to think of this person as someone who's just beginning their self-discovery journey, someone who's like researching Jungian analysis or something. Anyways, someone on a quest to discover the deeper aspects of connection and emotionality. And here we have someone who is soothing another person's emotional experience. David is definitely young in this scene. It's before David has taken up any kind of military project outside of his slaying of Goliath. So there is some sort of naivete presented in this representation of the Knight of Chalices, or the Knight of Cups, and some kind of skill, because as someone who has played the harp professionally, I know that playing the harp takes quite a bit of dedication, at least if you would like to do it well. So I appreciate that aspect. This is someone who is practicing in multiple levels, practicing their instrument, which is an emotional tool in this case, in this scenario, and also practicing their social connection acumen. David is learning how to interact with royalty when he is destined to be the next royalty. So definitely a sticky position to be in and sticky politics to navigate and all of that to practice and to become all the more skilled as a result. Queen of Chalices, Hannah, mother of faith. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. 1 Samuel 1:27 through 28. Once again, consistent on theme, same stories, same characters so far in this court. In this card, we have someone who is so in tune with the waters that their dress sort of flows into the waters at their feet, and they're holding the fancy special religious cup that was the Ace of Cups in this deck. And here we have represented a woman who is the holder of emotional secrets, and I would say that the way she's holding her sword is sort of held back, and perhaps she's holding back either her mental knowing or holding back her words and prioritizing this emotional knowing. And I guess in both of these cases, the cup is covered and therefore secrets are implied. So in this case, though, we have Hannah, the mother of Samuel. And Hannah goes to the temple to pray, and she is accused of being drunk by the high priest Eli because of the way that she's praying. The way she's expressing herself is especially... So Eli thinks that she's drunk and chides her, and she corrects him and lets him know that instead of causing a scene, she is communing with the divine. And Eli stands corrected. He accepts his flub and he acknowledges her devotion and sincerity. And Hannah then conceives the child that she then donates back to the temple. And when Samuel, her son, is a boy, she puts him in Eli's care to be brought up by God and in God's home. And that's part of how Samuel becomes the amazing prophet that he becomes. So I would say this is also a representation of a deep knowing that is not consistent with our practical, logical ways of knowing, and a really good representation of devotion, not only to that way of knowing, but also to the divine that supplies that way of knowing. King of Chalices, Nehemiah rebuilding Jerusalem. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. Nehemiah 2:17. Now, I think this is a very interesting choice. This is a part of the story after the Jewish humans have been exiled to Babylon, exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. And when Nebuchadnezzar takes over Jerusalem and removes all of the royalty and upper-class people from Jerusalem and exiles those people, he replaces the positions in Jerusalem with other groups of people. And so when the Jewish humans return from exile to Jerusalem, there are other people living in what used to be their homes. And what's interesting is several generations have gone by. So the people who are currently living in Jerusalem when the Jewish humans return are people who have only known what it is to live in Jerusalem. So we have this very tumultuous experience going on here where there's a disagreement about whose home is whose. And Nehemiah, I guess, is sort of like these characters, especially this one over here, who's standing amidst all of the bumpy waves, and at least on behalf of some of the people involved, he's creating more stability and security. One thing I associate with the king sometimes is a sense of entitlement or perhaps, okay, so the king is someone who has the most power in the courts, is the highest number and the last character. So not necessarily because he's a man or because he's the king, just because of his position in the court system. He is the one who supposedly has the most power. And sometimes in life, when people have lots of power and have fewer people checking them on that power, they can become egotistical or think that their way is always right, or be a little bit less gentle in their approach. And so sort of the shadow side of this card, and I think Nehemiah could potentially represent that shadow quite well. So yeah, I think it's a good choice, even though I'm surprised by it. Thank you so much for looking at the Biblical Tarot with me a little bit deeper. Be sure to like and subscribe and you won't miss any of the future content that's coming. So many blessings.